Hello everyone, and welcome back to season 5 of the Digital Adoption Show. I'm your host Neha Smriti, Growth Marketing Manager at Whatfix. And today we are going to test through our discussion whether your learning and development strategy is ready for 2025. We all know as technology advances ahead and our employees' expectations evolve, traditional learning is being challenged like never before. Today, we are exploring how these emerging trends from AI to digital skill gaps and much more are compelling us to rewire our L&D strategies for the future. To help us unpack these changing times and arising needs in L&D, I am thrilled to introduce our guest, David Kelly. David Kelly is the chairman of Learning Guild, where he drives innovative strategies that merge learning and technology to transform workplaces and enrich lives. Decades of experience in learning and performance leadership, David has held pivotal roles from CEO and EVP at Focus Zone Media to strategic position at Carver Federal Savings Bank and New York Community Bank Corp, cementing his today's reputation as a visionary leader in L&D. As a dynamic speaker, writer, and a thought leader, he continues to inspire organizations worldwide to adopt fresh technology advanced approaches to learning that meet today's evolving workforce demands. Welcome to the show, David. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
So, before we start our actual discussion, I just wanted to have a fun round of this or that to just get a sneak peek into your personality. So, are you ready for it?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I'll have two questions and you can choose the best that fits your preference. My first would be paper books or e-readers.
Most of my reading is on an e-reader these days.
Perfect. I love that. Usually I have my Kindle, but for some reason, all my fictional readings I do on a paperback. But
Hmm.
for all the non-fictional ones, I prefer an e-reader myself.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do read paper books, but usually it's just to get a break from a screen. That's usually it.
That's actually true. Okay, next one would be handwritten notes or digital notes, especially while you're in a meeting.
I don't know if this is cheating, but for me it's both. It's digital, but it's not typed notes. I use a good notes app that I use a handwriting on. So technically it's both for me.
Great pick, thanks. A mystery adventure or actually a well-planned getaway for you?
It's a bit of mix of both for me. I'm always a planner. I like to know where I'm going and get things done, but I also like the flexibility. One of the things when I travel, especially when I'm speaking at a conference or something, I'll have a destination. I'm in a city that I've never been. There might be like a very popular tourist attraction, and I will walk to it. And it might be a 20-minute walk, but it might take me 3 hours because I like to just to explore things as I'm walking. So it's a little bit of a mix of both.
Yeah, so planning before the trip, but being spontaneous on the trip. Yes,
Absolutely.
perfect. So spontaneous jam session or a quiet creative retreat. I think it's very similar to the last one, but
Yeah, this one's got a little bit more of a work feel to it, and I am definitely if I have a project that I need to work on, I will go in a space by myself, marinate on it, put lots of this post-it notes all over the walls. So for me, the quiet retreat for some of the big projects usually is my space.
that's nice. Office pet or an office plant?
A 100% office pet. I will kill a plant, but I will pet an animal any day of the week.
Even I have killed a cactus, a small little cactus that I owned once.
Yeah.
Okay, the final one in the list is futuristic tech toys or vintage gadgets.
I do both. I'm always exploring the future, but I'm a bit of a gamer myself and throw a retro game like a Mario or a Pac-Man at me, and I'm a very happy person. But I'm always exploring the future tech.
Awesome. Now that we have had some fun, let's dive into the heart of today's discussion. But so before we start this discussion, I would want our listeners to actually get to know your journey. So if I'm not wrong, you have almost 4 decades of experience, right?
My mother would probably agree with that because that would mean I was training people when I was a teenager, and so it's closer to 2 to 3 decades that I've been in this. I probably fell in the field in my early 20s that I've been doing this, so a little closer to 3 decades. But yeah, I'm sure my some of my instincts as a trainer were present to my parents when I was younger, much to their chagrin.
I'm sure, I'm sure. And okay, so out of all those 3 decades of experience that you had, and those obviously would have done lots of exciting stories. So, in fact, even the last time we were speaking, you said you accidentally fell into L&D. It was not something you had planned. But I would love to know, in fact, my listeners also would love to know the moment that everything clicked for you. And was there a particular experience or influence early on that made you actually realize that this was the path you were going to take?
Sure. So yeah, there definitely were some. I don't know that there was that one specific aha moment, but like a lot of people in our field, circumstance presented itself at the simplest level. I was in banking for a long time. I started as a banker, had a couple of different jobs, rose in the ranks, and was a district manager for banking. And I was working for an institution, and I was very good at my job. And I was working for an institution that was in a growth phase, did a lot of acquisitions. And similar to a lot of organizations, they looked at me and said, "You're really good at your job. Go show other people how to do that."
Yeah.
And I did that. And it wasn't, I didn't see it as training. I just saw it as, oh, I'm gonna help other people learn how to do the job. Like that, just workplace stuff that normally happens, that you don't think of yourself as a trainer, but you're just helping someone along. And we did a lot of acquisitions. I think we did 6 acquisitions in 5 years. And I kept on being part of the acquisition team. I started doing less and less in my day job and started doing more of this because I was having success at it. And I guess the closest to an aha moment in there was when I started realizing, when people come to me and say, "Can you do this? We're going to do this again for another project. We have another acquisition. Can you help it?" I started looking forward to it because I really enjoyed taking people from that moment where through the acquisition there was uncertainty, there was concern, and by providing a strong onboarding experience to them in the organization, we were able to help them succeed. We were able to reduce their stress. We were able to help them succeed in the new role and become a viable part of a very valuable part of the new organization. And being in the training role that I was, helping them along that journey was very satisfying to me. Helping them fix that problem that they had of the uncertainty around it was really satisfying to me. So when the opportunity came that they said, "Would you like to? You've been doing this help on the side for quite some time, but we see the impact it's having. Would you like to do this full time for us?" I jumped at it. I was like, "Yeah, this would be really enjoyable to do." And then I just became a student of the field, dove into it headfirst, and discovered I really loved it. I loved the stuff that's there. I've always been, and over time, I've always been a techie person. So the opportunity to play with a new shiny tool and leverage that within the context of the training that we have in an appropriate way, really, I found my passion in that moment. So then it wasn't necessarily that aha moment, but there was definitely, when the opportunity rose, I discovered that I was jumping at it because I was very passionate about it.
Amazing. How was it different from actually using it, and whenever there was a chance where you had to do this
Mhm.
knowledge transfer to people, how did it transfer to maybe just being a trainer? And how did you acquire those skills? Because while you were doing it, the tech part of it, you were utilizing it in your daily job. But once you became a full-time trainer, how do you juggle between getting to know the tech and then training other people to use it?
Yeah, so there are two elements. In the early stages, I think that there are some people who they have a natural tendency to be good teachers without necessarily being taught how to be a teacher or an educator. They're just naturally, their instincts naturally lend themselves to being good teachers to people in a metaphorical sense, if not necessarily a pedagogical sense. So when I made the formal change, where, for lack of a better term, when my business card changed and I had my job title changed, I dove in. And part of diving in was, I've been doing this and been having success, but I didn't go to school for it. I knew that there was a right way to do these things that I had never been shown. So I dove into that. I looked into resources that could do that. I got certified in different ways so that I could learn how the proper way to do things, all the foundational stuff that people who went to school for this did. I had to do kind of ad hoc through the job and became a student of the field. So when I got to the point of doing things, when the tech stuff kind of started coming, I've always been a very curious person around the tech and like to play with the new toys. But putting that in the context of work, it gave me the opportunity to play with these different things and see these new technologies that emerged and ask myself the question of, what's the opportunity here? Is this going to solve a problem that we could use in our work? And continuing to look at things through that lens, from when I started and new technologies emerged to what I do today, looking at it, just being able to play with stuff through this lens of curiosity, but then being strategic enough to look at it and say, what are the opportunities and what problems could these potentially solve for the organization?
Great to know that. And this actually gives an insight into how the journey for people like you has been, and also a career trajectory for a lot of L&D folks. So my next question to you, David, would be, a lot of people in the L&D space today, or training, or even other areas of HR, look up to you for what's latest in L&D and what's latest in HR. But I would love to know, how do you keep yourself informed and how do you keep yourself just get to know latest developments and trends in this space? How do you do it? Do you follow any resources, any books you follow? How do you do it?
Sure. So the two biggest things that I do is I'm very intentional about how I use my network and social networking and things of that sort. I have very specific people that I have very specific feeds. Like I'm looking at my other screen right now, I have a bunch of tabs out there, and some of those tabs are very specific curated feeds of specific people. None of us are, I don't have the time, as much as my job in today's, the job that I have at the Guild, I have responsibilities to follow the full spectrum of the intersection of learning and technology. That's essentially my job to a certain extent. And there's too much there for one person to do. So I outsource it, for lack of a better term, by I may not necessarily be have the time to dive deep into all of the stuff that's going on in AI right now, as the obvious example, the gorilla in the room, so to speak. But I know a lot of people who do. And I trust those people. I've developed relationships with them and I trust them. And when I see that they post something and wow, this is really interesting and this is something that, and here are my thoughts on it, I make sure I read that. I make sure that's prioritized within my feed because I allow them, because they're spending the time to go deep into it, to curate the important stuff for me. And I do that across the spectrum. I find experts in gaming. I find experts in instructional design. I connect with those people and count on them and trust them that if they're finding something that they're doing the work and they're deep in this, and if they find something that's valuable enough to share with the network, with the community, then it's important enough for me to pay attention to. So by curating my network so that I have those really important people in there that I trust, that helps me stay on top of things and it helps me surface thing. I think the biggest thing for them is that they surface things that I might want to take a deep dive into. They keep me aware of everything that's going on in the industry, but then it also surfaces the things that I might want to prioritize my time to take a deeper dive into. So it's really about the people that you connect with more than the resources that you're personally consuming, in my opinion. That's how I do it.
I think after a point where your responsibilities increase and you have a lot on your plate, you have to channelize your energy and you want some expert coming into and just sharing their work to you. I think that's the best way to go about learning anything in today's
Yeah,
time.
absolutely.
Perfect. So moving on, David, we know how L&D in itself is evolving fast and like really fast. And with AI coming in picture, talks around skill-based learning and overall changing workforce expectation. I would want to understand as we head into 2025, what are some of the biggest trends that we actually shape the way we approach learning at work today? And with so much happening, what should be the top priorities for L&D leaders to focus on?
I think the biggest priority I think all L&D leaders should focus on is to oversimplify context. And I mean that in every sense of the word, because there is no one answer that I could give that I could give you to that question that applies to anyone who might be listening to this. You've got to understand, I can give you the macro trends of what I see going on in the industry, but you have to, as an individual, look at those macro trends and ask yourself which one of those apply in my context, which one of those apply within the resources that I have available, the culture that I work in. Because there is never one of the things I get asked fairly often is what's the right answer about this? What's the right answer about that? And there isn't one right answer. There's not a right answer to the question. There's a right answer for you in your context. And the right answer that works for you today might change tomorrow if you changed organizations or you had a leadership change or anything like that. So context is always the piece that I think L&D professionals need to be focused on is why does this matter to me in the environment that I'm in at this point in time? Now, beyond that, I think there are some macro trends and that are going on that I think are L&D professionals should be focused on. Obviously, the big one that everyone's talking about right now is AI, and it's an easy example to talk around because it echoes what I've been saying there. The lots of organizations are going to look at AI differently. So how should I be using AI? What does it mean for my L&D group? Is really contextual to how your organization views AI. If you have an organization that is extremely cautious about how their use of AI and they're protector and they haven't figured out their data strategy around it and things like that. So that is going to shape how you support AI in your organization. Flip side is also true. If you have an organization that is extremely innovative and is giving and is allowing people to explore the use of these tools to create new solutions, you should be doing that yourself. The big thing that I think is sometimes missed, and again, I'll use AI as the example, but this applies to all the technologies that are there, is how are people learning through these new technologies that are disrupting their work? Because AI is a big one. AI is one that is very much disrupting how work gets done in organizations. And there's lots of different ways to view our work. One of the ways that I often look at it is our job is to support people's work. Simple, just we talk about it through learning, but our job is very often to support people's work. And if the way that they do their work is changing, then the way that we need to support them should be changing accordingly. And we don't often do that. We often just change the content, but we don't change the methodology. And this is going to be fundamentally changing the way that people work. Therefore, there should be some significant changes to the way that we're supporting people for the work. We need to be looking not only internally at what we do, but externally to what the people we support are doing so that we can adjust what we're doing to continue adding value to that. And I think that's huge because we are in this environment right now where a lot of the stuff that has traditionally been brought to a lot of the value that has traditionally been brought by the humans who work in L&D is increasingly being provided by technology. That's how technology works. We're just in an advanced state of this. As technology starts to be able to fill some of those spaces that were previously filled by humans, what are we replacing that with? People tend to look at that through the lens of risk. I tend to look at it through the lens of opportunity. This stuff that I used to do that a machine can do better than me today, let the machine do that. What can I do with that time that I filled? And that's exciting to me. So I think long-winded answer to your question, I think that we need to be looking at how our workplaces are changing, how the AI is changing the way work is done, how AI is automating some of our processes, and what we and the workers that we support are doing differently with that bandwidth that's becoming available.
True. That was an interesting take, David. So basically, putting it down on the context of how exactly we want to strategize will define our L&D strategies going forward. Doubling on that, in today's time, as we see going forward, like there's a widening digital skill gap, and which obviously urgently calls for more efficient and engaging solutions, which you were even talking about. I was reading an article, I think, by Josh Bersin, who talked about the rise of super workers, people basically who seamlessly integrate between technology, technical know-how and adaptability. How do you see this evolving? How do you foster these super workers going ahead? And how do you close these skill gaps? What could these companies actually do, which might be wrong when they are trying to reduce the skill gap in the current times?
I think that there's different definitions for what a skills gap is, but in the context of these super workers, which are emerging, I saw the article that you're referring to, we should learn from them first and foremost, because they are leveraging the ecosystem of tools that are around them to really enhance the contribution that they can make to an organization. And right now it's grassroots, it's people figuring it out on their own, but there are going to be some proven practices that emerge from that. We should be on top of that. We should be following what these people are doing. We should be modeling a lot of those behaviors for ourselves, because what they're basically doing is finding tools that can automate a lot of their processes and speed things along so that they can be more productive. That's what we should be doing. And there are a lot of stuff that these tools that are emerging play into our space very well. We tend to I think that sometimes what concerns me about the AI discussion, and this ties to the super workers, this ties to the skills gap as well, is where there are a lot of tools that are making what we do today in L&D, but in workplaces in general, more efficient. Where we are, and that's exciting. That's really exciting. But if we just focus on these tools in the context of efficiency, we're not really adding additional value there. Things can get done more quickly, but what the reason that that article resonated with me around these people with these superpowers is because they're not just taking what they do and making it more efficient. They're using that efficiency to take the productivity that can come from them as a human being and making it exponentially more. And that's what's there. That's what's the power of these tools are, is not how to take what I do today and make it more efficient, but to transform what I do and what I'm capable of by tapping into the power that's here. So that's what the superpower people are doing. And I think that we should We should be looking at that. I encourage everybody to read that article and embrace that sort of curiosity and that sort of problem solving mentality that is attached to that in our own work. That would be really powerful. As for the skill building aspects, for me, it's a little bit that everything that I described earlier was over the hood. People could be doing, and it's visible. Where the skill building piece that I think we should be tracking as L&D professionals is under the hood stuff, because the AI that's embedded into the platforms that we use every day in an invisible way is going to surface awareness around skills and the gaps to skills and how to close those gaps in a way that we haven't been able to do before. And that's really exciting to me. And the question then becomes, if we're able to identify these skill gaps, how are we going to target them? And I think that might be a little bit further out, not far, because things are advancing so quickly. But some of those platforms that a lot of this stuff is in platforms today, but it may not necessarily be evenly distributed, and it's not normalized the way some of the legacy stuff that we do is, but it's coming. And our ability to identify and target skills gaps in a practical way that can be addressed is going to transform the work that we do as L&D professionals. So even if you're not playing in that space today, you need to be aware that's coming so that you can be prepared for it.
True. In fact, like you said, more than efficiency that these technology are bringing today, it comes down to how effectively you're using it and also improving the quality of your overall work. So not just utilizing this tech to reduce the time you took to say do XYZ job, but rather doing the same job in a much efficient, productive, and giving out a better output should be the focus when it comes to how quickly we are having these efficient tools coming to our aid in the coming future.
Yeah, and an example I often use to help people see what I'm trying to convey here is around writing. Content generation with these the ability to create content through these tools is the low-hanging fruit that a lot of people are playing in. So it's a good example. I write often in the work that I do, and I work with editors. I have frustrated editors for 20 years. Because I have never met 5 sentences that I couldn't make 5 pages. I'm just a very wordy writer, and I know that about myself. I write as a stream of consciousness. So I know that the first feedback I ever get from an editor is always, wow, this is really long. Let's cut this, let's cut that. So one of the first things I ever did with ChatGPT when I started playing with it was I took something that I wrote, I gave it to him, I said, make it 30% shorter. And it did it instantly. Like it did it incredibly quickly. It did it instantly. And I feel like that's where the conversation in our field right now stops. That we had that I needed to do this. It enabled me to do it much quicker. It took something that takes me probably 2 hours to do. It did it in seconds. It was incredible, and it was transformative. And I feel like metaphorically, that's where our conversation in L&D is stopping right now, because we have this thing I needed to do and I made it quicker and I was able to automate it. Great. But that we didn't learn anything like that. That ignores the how are these that's taking training and education and making it more efficient. That's not looking at these tools through the lens of how are these tools changing how people learn. So how does it change how I learn? And I didn't do this as a conscious, I'm going to teach myself to be a better writer. I was fascinated and curious at how quickly it did that. And I just asked, the next question was, tell me what wow, that's great. Tell me what you cut out and why. And it came back and it was like, well, we took out this entire paragraph because it didn't really seem to be linked to the intent of the article. Okay, that's interesting. What do you consider to be the intent of the article? And I started asking it questions that in hindsight, it was essentially coaching me on how to be a more concise writer. I still use that tool, that method today. It's iterated to the point that my first prompt now is make this 15% shorter, because I've started to become a more concise writer through the interactions that I'm doing it there. So that's how ChatGPT and just the everyday usage of this tool, I didn't seek it out. There's no course, there's no training thing that I did. I'm just through the introduction of this tool into my workflow, it's affecting how I learn as a writer and how I build skills as a writer. And it's just through the natural introduction of this into my tool. And I think we need to be looking at it through that lens of how is the introduction of these tools changing the way that people learn in their everyday lives, because that should inform how we use these tools in the context of education and training. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
No. Even we used to use it to craft another paragraph out of the bigger transcript. But when you
Yep.
start probing, it actually gives you a context and you also learn on the go. It's like your companion rather than just your intern that you get out of ChatGPT. So that's actually great, David. Moving on, my next question to you is the you talked about how traditional learning actually is so different from what we are seeing now. Those were not really built for an agile or a remote or
Hmm.
hybrid teams. And plus, even the way people have actually started learning has changed so much from maybe a long, very structured training to more on demand, like how on the go, very self directed. And even the learners now want access to knowledge in real time. How do you think these L&D teams should restructure, overall structure of the team should be, and how should they rethink their approach to make learning more accessible and relevant? And I remember listening to one of your older podcasts where you talked how, which very resonated so widely with me, was how people today, if they want to know an answer, they just simply Google it on the
Hmm.
fly and they don't look back to what my LMS is gonna give me as an answer. So
Yeah.
how can these L&D teams actually harness this behavior and incorporate this in our day-to-day training instead of competing with it?
So I think that there are two opposing forces there. So one is what you touched on there, which I generally refer to as if you want to understand how technology is changing the way that we learn, you have to look at how technology, you don't look at education and training. If you want to understand how technology is changing how we learn, you have to look at how technology is changing the way that we live. And the Google example is exactly that. Nobody, when you're sitting at dinner and someone asks a question and no one knows the answer and someone pulls out their phone to Google it, nobody's thinking of that as like a self-directed learning moment. They're not thinking of that as I'm going to learn in this moment. They're fixing a problem of we have this awkward moment where no one knows the answer, and I'm going to fix that because I have this tool. So it's just the introduction of this tool and has changed the way that we behave in a way that affects the way that we learn on a daily day basis. What does that mean to us? And I think that's the smartphone is a great example of that because I think it speaks to a recurring problem that I think L&D has that we need to break out of. Because if you think about that example of someone didn't know something, they just pulled it out, they Googled it, they got the answer, they put it back in their pocket. Think about how smartphones were used in the context of L&D when they first emerged. We took the e-learning course and we just shrunk it to the screen that was on there. And we treated it just as a separate screen for the content that we were already doing. Same thing when e-learning first emerged, as I start to date myself a little bit, we took the classroom PowerPoints and we put them on a screen and automated them. And that's looking at the work that we do through what we do, allowing it to be defined by what we do. It's taking a new technology and approaching it with the wrong question. We look at the new technologies and say, how do I do what I do with this new technology that emerged? That's the wrong question, because it has the baggage of what I do attached to it, as compared to this new technology emerged. How does it change what I do? Or what could I do with this new technology that I've never been able to do before? That's a much more open question. That's a question that speaks to opportunity. So I think that's part of the equation here is to look at it through that lens and see how we can, when these new technologies emerge or something changes in the environment of how people are working and living on a daily basis, how do those changes inform our learning strategies? I think that's a big part of it, and there's an opportunistic part of that. On the flip side, we also have the headwinds of just culture in our organizations. We have the culture of one of the biggest headwinds I think L&D professionals in workplaces face is what I would refer to as the baggage of what learning looks like. We're all conditioned through 12 plus years of school around what it means to learn and be educated in an environment. As a teacher, there's a subject matter expert that's going to share information. You're going to take tests, you're going to do these different things. And that sets expectations around what training looks like when we get into workplaces that still stick with us today. Anytime we want to do something that's different than that, experiential learning, things of that sort, that look a little different than what people's expectations have been set by school, including the stakeholders who sign off on all of our budgets. We're battling a little bit of a headwind because there's almost a little bit of a change management approach to that of trying to get people to do something that's different. So both of those forces need to be navigated as anytime the environment changes with remote and hybrid teams. People are on these, like we're talking about right now. We're in a Zoom room right now to do this podcast. Most people are interacting in this sort of an environment on a regular basis right now. How does that inform our training strategies as we go forward? How does that impact the relationships we have? There's a lot of questions that need to be explored to add that context to the work that we do on a daily basis.
David, even from a strategic point of view, you touched base on how important it becomes. It's more of a change management that we are driving rather than just devising a L&D strategy. And even stakeholders have obviously they are the ones who approve any kind of learning initiative that you want to roll out in your company or in a wider spectrum as well. So does it come down to like the ROI that we show? Because that's one of the major things that we always speak about was the ROI of any kind of initiative, be it L&D or any part of our lives. Whenever we are driving or defining any initiative, they want to know the return on investment. How exactly we go on doing with these changing learning methodologies or learning?
For me, and this might seem like an oversimplification,
Right.
but for me, I spent a good portion in the early part of my career focused on the ROI equation of learning because it was one of the things I learned about. I was like, I'm a business person. That's something I should be focused on. And in my experience, I wound up stepping a little bit away of that because I couldn't, it was always trying to create, it was always trying to tell a story through the wrong lens, in my opinion. It was, I was, because people, a lot of organizations, at least the ones that I worked in the past, learning was a cost center. And trying to position it as an ROI that was providing value through a financial metric was always an uphill battle. And where I pivoted, which was still delivering the same sort of value, but was heard more by the stakeholders, was less around ROI of what the training is, but what were the problems that we're solving? What are the problems? Like it's where I shifted from this ROI focused mindset to one of more performance consulting of what are the challenges that your workers have that is going to help them, the salespeople that you have, that you definitely see an ROI from their efforts. What are the challenges that they have to be successful? And can I remove that challenge and help them be more successful? And when I started putting it through their language rather than mine, I got more support. I was able to, it was, even though it was more correlation than causation, I got more buy-in because I was able to correlate our efforts to results that other people were driving. I think that's a big part of it is understanding what the metrics could be that you could speak to, that we're not speaking our language, we're speaking theirs, and putting our work into their context. Because even though we have a lot of stuff that we talk about in L&D, our jargon around ROI. I don't think it's, at least in my experience, maybe I just wasn't successful at it, but I was never able to get that to be heard the same way I was when I flipped the script and I started talking about the activities that we do using their jargon. That was a very important shift in the work that I did, at least in terms of the success that I was able to have.
That makes sense. And being a marketer, it's very similar to how we see marketing and branding. It's
Mhm.
difficult when it comes to finding an ROI for any branding initiative because it's more of how people perceive your brand. And when it comes to marketing initiative, you can actually show it. So there's always a flip side to it. If you change the story of now people have talked about us, this is what they perceive our brand to be. So it's very similar to that. And I could totally resonate to what you actually spoke about. Moving ahead, you have been in the L&D space for quite a while now, and you have talked so much about making learning more practical and engaging. And we have seen a big shift towards, you talked about experiential and hands-on learning. And in fact, I was reading one of your HR and Leader Digest articles where you had, I think, recommended one article by Rachel Rosenfeld, who highlighted
Mhm.
like how blending simulations and continuous practice into your learning could enhance the overall learning experience. Do you see these as a future blueprint of L&D? Obviously, it's going to change, but or do you see there's a missing piece? What is your take on experiential and hands-on learning?
I think experiential learning, continuous practices are core elements of what we should be doing if they're applied appropriately. I think that one of the challenges that we have in our industry, at least in my observations, is we're always looking for the silver bullet metaphor of what's the, or if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, the one tool to rule them all. And that doesn't exist. It comes back to what I said at the start around context. Do I think that blended simulations and continuous practice, like that article was talking about, are really valuable. Yeah, if they're applied in the appropriate context where that's what is the needed support. And if you took blended simulations and continuous practice and applied it to an organization that just wants check the box compliance training, then it might be overkill because there's a lot more resources necessary to do that. But if your culture is such that you're not really, we don't want check the box compliance training. We want people to demonstrate the behaviors around compliance and understanding it, then creating some simulations that do that, giving people the opportunity to practice those sorts of things warrants that investment. So I think that the ability for us to match a methodology to the unique contexts of the resources we have available to us, the expectations that our stakeholders have, the maturity of our learning culture and our organization. That's all there. I think we should always be driving to get the most impactful solution to the problem that's at hand, and that's not a one size fits all. That's something that's got to be matched to your organization. It's got to be matched to the unique aspects of the context. I do think that sometimes we look at one thing and we're like, this is a really cool solution that we have here. We should apply it all over the place. And that's not necessarily an appropriate approach either. It's great to be excited. I think it's great to try different things. And I like to look at all the different slices that could be in the options pie, because sometimes the greatest solution isn't one of those slices. It's in the combination of the different slices that you might use to get to the solution. All of these are great options that are there, but I think the critical component is not which one is the best. It's being aware of as many as you can and applying the best one to each situation.
In my last discussion over a podcast, I was speaking to Christy Tucker. We
Mhm.
were having a discussion on scenario-based learning and simulation learning when it comes to software training, and even she shared the same nuance that when it comes to software training, there could be different contexts, like you said. If you want somebody to just have an hands-on practice with different data set, then simulation is your way to go. But if you want to maybe develop soft skills, then scenario-based learning, and that repetition doesn't matter because there will be so much context and there could be different scenarios where that learning will fall all over the place. So it comes down to context, and it brings us back to the first question itself. Amazing. Finally, we are coming towards the end of this podcast, and I just want our listeners to, if you had to give them one advice to take from today's discussion, what it would be?
Yeah, I think at this stage of my career, I think I often think of the questions that shape our mindsets. So that's where my mind naturally goes. I think that the one thing that I try to encourage people about often is expand your view. And what I mean by that is we tend one of the greatest ironies I think that exists in our field is we a lot of us refer to ourselves as learning professionals. And that's not, I'm not necessarily saying that's a good or a bad thing, but we do that. We refer to ourselves as learning professionals. But if you think about the behavior, what we do on a daily basis, we are really education and training professionals for the most part. A lot of the activities that we do are education and training, which is not saying that it is better or worse, but I think that the difference is important to be aware of. I work for the Learning Guild. We host DevLearn, which is one of the biggest conferences in North America, has an expo with 200 plus exhibitors in it. Most of those exhibitors are in the education and training space. It's not better or worse, but understanding that education and training is a subset of learning is important, because when you start realizing that people learn a lot of different ways, that's when we start looking at what are the learners doing? What are they doing to learn how to do their jobs? How are they solving the problems in their work? Start reframing what we do through the lens of not how are we educating and training people, because that focuses on our activities. What are the people that we support doing? What are the activities of learning? What are the people, what are the workers that we support doing on a daily basis to support their learning, to solve their problems, to do their work better? And I think if we start paying a little bit more attention to that, it can inform new ways and new strategies and new opportunities for the work that we do.
Even in my organization, whenever we are developing any sort of software or any strategy, we have to keep the user, that could be your employee, that could be your customers, at the center of our all our initiatives. Gives the best results in the form of the best initiative, best experiences for these users, because then they use it like how they love to use it.
Exactly. Mhm.
Perfect, David. Perfect. So this is the end of it. And thanks for joining in. This conversation has been truly enlightening, I must say. And your insights on growing trends were amazing. It's clearly blending innovation while putting humans at the center of the strategy is your approach to go. And that's what we practice as well. So thanks for sharing
Excellent.
and wisdom.
Oh, thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks. I hope you had a nice time here as well in this
I
conversation.
definitely did. Thanks for
Perfect.
being here.
Perfect, perfect. And to our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to the Digital Option Show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel to share and leave us a review. Your support helps us bring even more inspiring and insightful conversation your way. I'm your host, Neha Smriti, signing off. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of learning and technology and stay curious about what the future holds.